All right, welcome everyone. We are just giving folks time to join and get started. So let's just wait a little bit. We'll have some background music playing. Hey, welcome everyone. We are so excited to jump into our conversation today about energy democracy with organizers and leaders from the Frontlines. My name is Jana Bujallo, but I am the Climate Justice Manager
What
at
if all of
PowerSwitch
us
Action.
had
We are a network of 21 grassroots organizations working at the city and state level to build authentic democracies and economies that work for the many, not the few. Electricity is vital to our lives. We rely on it for water, food, medicine, physical safety, and communications. Yet, private electric utility corporations hold outsized power in the governance of our energy system. As a network, we have been pushing for our utilities to become more accountable for a long time. And when the pandemic hit, the dangerous practices of private electric utilities became even more apparent. A lot of us experienced this, right? While many of us were seeking safety instead of our homes, we had to beg private electric utility corporations to keep us connected to power. Without power, we already knew that the risk for infection and death increased. And this risk was even higher for BIPOC and low wealth communities who are already most vulnerable to precarious housing situations and public health crises. Across the PowerSwitch Action Network, we jumped right in to intervene and advocate for long-term policies that would protect BIPOC, low wealth, and immigrant communities from disconnections and debt collections. Groups in our network, like Power in Philadelphia, Lane in Los Angeles, Puget Sound Sage in Seattle, Citizens Action in Milwaukee, Detroit Action in Detroit, and Community Labor United in Boston continue to be engaged in this fight today. Together, we are building a renewable energy system that is governed and controlled by workers and communities. That's why we developed a set of energy democracy popular education tools to share our vision and help other organizers win energy democracy for their communities. To kick things off, we're going to share with you a video. Access to affordable renewable electricity. What if all of us had access to affordable renewable electricity, no matter our income or skin color? Bills would be manageable, and we wouldn't have to choose between buying groceries or keeping the lights on. Electricity would come from renewable energy sources like the wind and the sun, keeping our air and water clean. And low-income people of color and immigrant communities would have as much power as giant corporations.
This sounds great, but can we make it happen?
Actually, it's already happening. It starts with everyday people having a say and decisions being made about their local electricity. This is what we call energy democracy, a renewable energy system governed by people.
So, if energy democracy is communities governing electricity, who's making those decisions now?
Well, currently most of our homes and businesses get their electricity from privately owned electric utility corporations. A private utility is owned by stakeholders, managed by a private board, and incentivized to maximize profits. In the US, private utilities serve 72% of all electricity consumers. And even though 1 in 4 households struggle to pay their electric bills, these corporations prioritize their bottom line over human lives.
So you're saying private utility companies line their pockets while families can't keep their lights on?
Yep. Some private utilities build fossil fuel facilities near low income and communities of color. Consumers are also charged for the cost of building these facilities, plus extra, to ensure profits. All while excluding women and people of color from higher wages, benefits, and leadership positions.
It sounds like without the involvement of communities, private utilities go unchecked. How do we ensure everyone has access to affordable, renewable electricity?
Fortunately, we have solutions within our reach. Generating their own electricity from solar and wind. Some places are building energy projects that create high-quality local jobs, reduce fossil fuel dependence, and protect communities from devastating impacts during disasters. Other cities have replaced their private utilities with public utilities, which is a utility owned by either the local government or customers of the utility directly. They provide electricity as a public service, ensuring reliable and reasonable rates, and are accountable to local residents. And this is just the beginning of what's possible with energy democracy.
I'm convinced electricity is vital to our lives, and we can make sure that everyone has access to it through community control.
Exactly. With energy democracy, we have the power to both light our homes and create the society we want to live in. All right, let's jump in and hear from leaders on the ground on how they are organizing for and winning energy democracy in their communities. Today, we are joined by 4 incredible panelists. Raya Salter is the founder and executive director of the Energy, Justice, Law, and Policy Center and a leader of the Movement for Black Lives, the Black Hive. She is the climate auntie. Raya is an energy justice attorney, activist, and author. She is also an appointee to the New York State Climate Action Council, the body that developed New York's plan to implement the nation-leading climate law. She is an adjunct professor at Cardozo Law School and is widely published on matters of energy regulation. We are also joined by Jessica Guadalupe Tovar. Jessica is an energy democracy organizer with the local Clean Energy Alliance, based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Jessica has worked for 20 years as an EJ, environmental justice, and climate organizer in a variety of urban, rural, and indigenous communities throughout California and Arizona. Her focus is mentoring young organizers and building new leadership for energy democracy to fight for a just transition and bring clean power to the people. Lee Matsueda is the executive director of Community Labor United. He ensures that workers in environmental justice communities most impacted by the climate crisis have a strong voice in developing long-term solutions that advance a more sustainable economy. Lee has been inspired by community and union members that he's worked with who choose to come together to fight for their rights against all odds. He believes in building strategic coalitions and partnerships to create significant and transformative change. And we are joined by Felicia Allen, who is from the small southern Ohio town of Portsmouth. She has worked in the utility scale industry since 2020, building large solar installations across Ohio. She's a leader in the Green Workers Alliance and was part of the first class of GWA fellows who worked part-time to build the organization while they continued their work in the who continued their work in the renewable energy industry. Green Workers Alliance is a national group organizing with solar and wind workers who are pushing for climate action and good jobs. Oh, it's so great to see everybody. Let's jump into the questions here. So it's really clear that our current energy system is not working for everyday people and workers. As I've mentioned, across the PowerSwitch Action Network, our affiliates are engaging utility campaigns that shift power from utilities to workers and ratepayers. For instance, in Philadelphia, Power has been fighting PECO, a private electric utility, to use more renewable energy to generate electricity, incorporate the demands of ratepayers into its service plans, and create good family-sustaining jobs. Sounds awesome, but it's been a really hard fight for them. And next week, they'll launch their People's Energy Plan, which will spell out how the utility must operate and what service plan the Public Utility Commission should approve. Power's plan puts power back in the hands of communities and workers. And these are the types of energy democracy experiments that are happening all over the country and the ones that y'all are involved in. So can each of you share what energy democracy means to you and what brings you to this work? What is a challenge that you and your organization are taking on? And I'll start with you, Jessica.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. For me, energy democracy means that, we have access to the information on how our energy system works, and that we also have access in intervening and advocating for the energy system that we want to see in our communities, and ultimately, transform our communities from sacrifice zones into hubs of clean energy solutions. So that's how I would say energy democracy would be defined. Thanks.
Thanks, Jessica. Lee, what about you?
Yeah, well said, Jessica. Hi, everyone. That's a really honor to be on the panel. Yeah, I mean, since, way back 2007, the organization I work with, Community Labor United, we've been kind of organizing to build resident and worker power through something called the Green Justice Coalition. And back then I was working at this environmental justice group in the Roxbury neighborhood here in Boston called Alternatives for Community Environment. And that's how I really started to see the possibilities when we come together, and also when we come together with our siblings in the labor movement. And so, we fought to secure the triple bottom line, winning investment in jobs, green infrastructure projects, all of these kinds of things. And in doing that, I think the voice and leadership of frontline workers and communities has been central, right? So we've turned out for public hearings, secured seats on decision-making boards, taken direct action and needed. So energy democracy is about, not just shifting policy, governance, co-governance over public funds and public infrastructure, but it's also about ownership. And so beyond these policy campaigns, I think we really wanted to test out what it would look like to have community ownership, particularly through a microgrid development project. And so that's, I can say more another time, but basically it's an exciting project that, is set to break ground later this year in 2 different cities locally. Here in the Chinatown neighborhood in Boston, there's a B corporation that was set up through a community land trust, and that's ready to own assets, to work with the developer. And I think, it's another form that it takes for us, is not just showing up and shifting the public conversation and the policy, but also let's actually realize the vision we want to see.
Amazing. Felicia, do you want to share?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Felicia Allen. I am a renewables worker in the state of Ohio. Energy democracy to me, means like we need to come together, as a community, like all of us, the workers to the communities that utilities, wind and solar are built in, also to the utility companies that ultimately own these projects. There's so much money out there, and it all, why should it just go to one person? It should be good for all of us. As me, like us as a worker, I'm out here and I'm building these farms that are going to hopefully change the world. And it's where it's, fairly new. Working conditions are bad and no one wants to take accountability, and everybody just wants to point the finger, and it's time for change. Like, we need to make the world better.
All right, Raya.
Wow, that was so inspiring. Thank you so much. It's a deep honor to be on this panel with these distinguished and inspiring co-panelists. Come through beginning video. That video was spectacular. I hope we can get a copy. I'd love to show it to folks in my community. So energy democracy. So energy democracy to me really is the epitome of power to the people with regards to energy. It leans into participation, self-determination, choice, and very importantly, accountability with regards to energy systems. And that could be for an individual, a community, or a nation. Now, you see energy democracy challenging modes of traditional ownership that are seen as fundamentally unaccountable or not accountable enough or undemocratic, as in the video, be it privately owned companies that we see in the US. In some places around the world, people are challenging state-owned, energy companies. Some energy democratists are in favor of cooperatives or public renewables, but the moral of the story is participation. For instance, is structural racism preventing Black people from owning energy systems or being employed in energy systems? At the end of the day, power to the people is about self-determination, governance, and accountability. And what I would say at the end of that is that certainly in New York, we've seen success on things like building public renewables. In my work in organizing, it's really about, can we engage folks across race and other factors on these topics? And that's, I think, really at the heart of broadening this conversation from where I sit.
Thank you so much. So it sounds like we're all aligned, right? That energy democracy means having more participation, more accountability, ownership, and coming together as workers and communities to really build the energy future that we want. Can y'all share exactly the campaigns that you are working on and the challenges that you're taking on? I'll circle back to Jess.
Sure. Yeah, at the local Clean Energy Alliance, we actually came together like as an organization back in 2008, and it was because we had learned about community choice energy policy in California and really trying to gear up for advocating for a community choice program, which essentially is an energy agency that would be run by local elected officials. So in the policy, it could be cities, it could be counties, it could be multiple counties. And we wanted to advocate for a community choice program that we could advocate to, that our local electeds would be the deciders, right? And then that would replace, you know, the investor-owned utility in terms of deciding where our energy comes from. So we still use, and here in California, it's PG&E. It still uses the transmission wires, and you still get a PG&E bill, but that line item for electricity is now taken over by a local agency. So what that means is the money we pay towards electricity can come back in the form of community investments. And so that's why we advocated for community choice in the East Bay, particularly.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Lee, do you want to talk more about your microgrids campaign?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, for us, it really started because of extreme weather events and the impacts on local environmental justice communities. And I think as that was going on, and as we saw what happened in New York and other places, Puerto Rico, we were just like, listen, we have to find a different way for local communities that are really susceptible and at risk. And I think people are asking the question, are there ways for us to be collectively resilient in the face of these outages and weather disasters? Can we do that and own? Can we do that and build the future we want to see? And it was just an idea that started as a question. And I think what was powerful was people actually said, you know, as we work to shift policy and come together to build our power, we're also going to not just build our power, but build our communities. And so they came together to create a really cool partnership of the coalition I mentioned before, the Green Justice Coalition, but with some technical partners called Resilient Urban Neighborhoods. And these are folks who have experience doing energy project development. And so together they're making the effort to now say, all right, we're going to raise $11 million for these two communities. We're going to create a network of buildings in our communities that can sustain themselves, that can make sure, you know, if people need power to run medical equipment, to keep things in their refrigerator, to sustain during these times, really difficult times, that they're able to. And so that's been really, it's interesting because we usually like to talk a lot about campaign work, and this is a different type. It's actually a development project that's really stretched our capacities and made us had to reach out, building on the power and relationships that folks have built in these two municipalities, but also reaching out to folks that have experience in, you know, raising money for this type of development project, that are good at negotiating with project developers, that are really in the weeds on some of these things that we sometimes don't have the capacity and skill set for. So it's been an amazing learning process. And as I said, really exciting because we're about to break ground.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lee. Felicia, do you want to talk more about your work with the Green Workers Alliance?
Yeah. So Green Workers Alliance, you know, we're kind of small, but we're workers. We're wind workers. We're solar workers. You know, the workers, like, we are the community. You know, we live around these areas. You know, they are impacting our lives, and you know, without the workers, then the renewable plants aren't going to be built, you know, and without those, like, there won't be tax breaks for these companies, you know, and without that, then we can't change, like, without renewables, we can't change the world. So it's like, we're out here working, and you know, it's time to hold people accountable. It's time to hold the utility companies that are making all this money and have all these monopolies, all the way down to, like, the companies that hire us, the staffing agencies, like the low wages. Like, I'm from Ohio, and, like, politicians are being paid off and they're changing laws with big energy money, and it's time to stand up and be like, this needs to stop. Like we need to show the raw truth of what's really going on at the bottom root of renewables, so we can change it all the way to the top.
Mm.
Right. Right. I'm gonna let you jump in because I'm feeling it too.
Period. No, that was very excellent. I'll say the message I have for folks who are listening, certainly in the New York State context, is nothing real happens moving towards democracy and energy, power to the people and justice, without advocates and activists on the ground making it happen and keeping the pressure on. In 2019, we got a progressive climate act in New York State. We spent almost 4 years trying to turn that into a progressive plan, and we got a progressive plan. We just approved the New York State Climate Scoping Plan in December, and it was only a couple of months later that the governor, fueled by fossil fuel interests, came out with a major push trying to roll back our climate law and really kind of undo a lot of what we were trying to get done. Now, we pushed back for the moment, but in New York State, what it's really about is making sure that our climate law, which requires 100% zero emissions electricity by 2040, 70% renewable by 2030, really happens. And that also includes now with the Public Renewables Act that I know we'll talk about later, and was also in the scoping plan, that the dirtiest peaker plants in New York City must be done, shut down by 2030. That is a huge environmental justice win, and that we have to plan for the actual transition off of fossil fuels. And that is our work now, because we have cap and trade now coming to New York State. We've seen in California and Washington how that can not bring down emissions and not do it in an equitable way. And we are trying to enforce that. And what that means on the ground for a person like myself is organizing to get the message out to communities so that folks can participate authentically in these conversations.
Thank you so much, everyone. So what I'm hearing is that we want to transition, right? Because we want more investment in our communities, right? We know, for instance, as Felicia was saying, that without workers, a renewable energy transition will not be possible. So they need to have more power. And we need to keep the pressure on, especially to implement progressive policies that we have won. But we're going up against really big, powerful fossil fuel corporations, and they're not going to go on without a fight. We've seen them pour millions into campaigns against local energy and climate initiatives. Felicia, I know you were angling at that when you're talking about the stuff that's happening in Ohio. They've donated to anti-climate and pro-fossil fuel politicians. They've even co-opted the transition to renewable energy, such as instituting community solar programs where there is little to no community involvement and where the facility is owned by the utility, right? So we have a big challenge ahead of us, and I'm sure the audience is dying to hear what barriers or challenges are you seeing and encountering in your campaigns? Felicia, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So like one of the biggest barriers is, if your appointed politicians are taking bribes, where do you go from there? It's like, if these are the people that are in charge and are entrusted with, the greater good for us, but they're not, they're not invested in the greater good of us. They want the money, to bail out fossil fuels. Like Larry Householder in Ohio, yes, he did get in trouble. Finally, somebody is going to be held accountable, but how? Just how much accountable is he really going to be held, and it's like we need to change these laws. They took renewables from Ohio by 2026 to 12.5%, all the way down to 8.5%. And then after 2026, a lot of the government programs are going to be gone, like your heat programs, your light heat. that help low income families keep their lights on. And that's just greed. There is absolutely no reason to take away those programs at all. And it's really starting, at the bottom and going to every politician and being like, where do you stand on this, and what are we going to do as a whole and as a community to change this and make this better for everybody. But it's the accountability. You can't get anybody to stand up and say, okay, I will take responsibility for this and I'm going to make a change.
Yeah, I hear you. Raya, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, that maybe I'll continuing on this theme. One of the major things that we face in New York is misinformation from the fossil fuel industry. I had testified before Congress in the big oil misinformation hearing in the fall about this exact topic. The fossil fuel industry spends billions and billions of dollars worldwide to fight climate action at every single level. And it's in the water at this point. And in fact, even, TV shows or stations or other outlets that you would think of being progressive, you sit there and you're like, and all of a sudden, you see that hazy commercial and it'll be like a sunflower field and like a girl running and then like a fossil fuel logo. And they're talking, it's just straight greenwashing on every level. And so they're fighting it at COP. They're fighting it in the federal government with the Inflation Reduction Act, which has a whole bunch of false solutions that are getting greenlit everywhere. And yes, they fight it on the state level. If you Google New York State Climate Action Plan, this plan I just talked about that we all spent all this time putting together, the first thing that comes up right next to that Google is New Yorkers for Affordable Energy, which is a fossil fuel industry front group that is on the ground, literally putting pressure on politicians and in the news, scaring people, telling people that folks are coming for their stove, that everyone's going to have to pay $30,000 for a heat pump. And it's terrible. And we uncovered one of their marketing pitches in New York, where they were talking to like the propane industry and other interests in New York. And they're literally saying, you need to give us your money now to fight this climate program and regime that's happening in New York State. Like this is happening. It's real. And apathy in the face of it, is a problem.
Yeah, most definitely. Jessica, what about your work?
Yeah, we definitely have a laundry list of things that the utility corporations have been doing to fight the work that we're doing. Essentially, gosh, I don't even know where to start. I'll give you an example. PG&E, and all the other utility corporations have been going state by state and gutting net energy metering, which is the incentive that people would be allowed to put solar on their home or on their property and begin to make, money off of their excess solar. So what these corporations have been doing is going state to state, gutting that policy, because they don't want you to own your energy system and they don't want you to make money from it. They want to make money off of your system. And so they've used these divide and conquer tactics that divide people racially. And yes, unfortunately, we have seen that actually work. And it goes with, again, co-opting narratives of racial justice, right? Dividing people, and then getting rid of the very policies that we're standing to benefit from. We're actually fighting for microgrids right now because we're dealing with a lot of power shutoffs because PG&E, whose transmission wires cause all these devastating wildfires in California, are now trying to take our narrative where we're saying we want clean energy microgrids, and they're saying they're going to do microgrids. Well, not all microgrids are equal. Their microgrids are diesel-powered microgrids. They're not clean, okay? And actually, we don't want PG&E doing this for us. We can do this ourselves, right? There are so many other examples I can use, but I want to uplift that a lot of how they do this is with front groups that was mentioned earlier. So for example, if PG&E gives money to community-based organizations, they'll start creating a list of organizations that support or supposedly support. I guess when you sign for the money, you're signing away your rights and you get put on this list of a front group. And that was how they successfully gutted net energy metering in the state of California, going state by state. And I want to just also uplift that the governor clearly takes money from this corporation because he's allowed them to get away with this in the state of California. So I'll stop there.
You can keep going. We got Lee.
Yeah, I mean, a similar story here, obviously, in Massachusetts, gas and energy companies like National Grid and Eversource putting huge money into campaign contributions, big money to lobby against us and our allies. And, they're behind the curtain advancing policy efforts. They're limiting worker standards and protections. They're working with conservative think tanks to publish their story under the guise of a report or research. And we also see them taking up a lot of space in the conversation around workforce development, holding conferences in the name of developing equitable clean energy and jobs and job pathways. So I think the thing that is challenging is, we could spend all day kind of checking these efforts, calling them out, and we get sucked into that often. But I think we also have to figure out how to take that forward-facing kind of offensive stance to go after some of these companies. And that's hard sometimes. It's a different style of campaigning that many of us have come from. I know for me, it's different than some of the campaign work that I started with. But by doing that, I think that really we got to figure out ways to apply pressure on them. And I think that's about realizing, it's about being disciplined. It's about staying focused and realizing the future for workers, our communities, the planet we want to see and deserve.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Lee. And I will have to agree, like, corporate campaigning is different from the kind of work that we've seen. But I do want to point out that there are some campaigns that are putting pressure on electric utilities directly. We've seen it with DTNE in Detroit, in Michigan, and Washington, D.C. Power has gone up against PECO within our network. And it needs to be done. It's just hard, right? Because of all of the challenges that y'all brought up. They have more money than us, and they have like these politicians on their side, but it doesn't mean that this is a losing cause, right? Because of the campaigns that y'all have been winning and the work that you have been doing to show that this work is possible when we work together at our local level and, continue to bring it up. I want to actually take us to think about the bigger picture and like at the federal level. So right now we are in a pivotal moment when it comes to funding a climate future, right? From the bipartisan, from BIL to IRA to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, right? There are trillions of dollars pouring in to build quote unquote climate resilient states and cities. This includes billions for community energy, workforce development, renewables, expansion, and grid updates, right? But we know that if the money falls into the wrong hands, we are only going to be perpetuating a system where private electric utilities own energy and communities and workers continue to suffer and are the ones who are exploited. But the exciting thing is that we could possibly see investments in community programs. For instance, our affiliate Lane has a workforce development program, which is jointly operated by their local utility and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 18, right? So this is a community, union, and utility joint project, right? And it's been highly successful. This pre-apprenticeship training program is more than just about training and getting folks into jobs. It's about fighting against systems of oppression that values the lives of poor people and people of color less, right? So when you're investing in programs that are shown to work and they are developed by communities, we possibly have a winning chance to invest in an energy future and to invest in the climate future where we all win. Okay, sorry, I went on a little rant there, but I'm curious to hear, how do you see your work fitting into this movement for energy democracy when we have all of these dollars flowing into our states and cities? Raya, I'll start with you.
So no, I think your intro was spectacular. This is really the challenge and the opportunity of our time. Make no mistake, the utilities are and they have already gotten huge portions of this money to do all of the things that you're talking about. The backdrop of the IRA is that, yes, it's the biggest climate investment in US history, but because of the compromise, it has a tremendous amount of bad stuff, and was done in a way, utilities are literally getting huge subsidies to do this work without really a lot of sticks or regulation behind it. I think we can also presume and assume that a lot of the same people who usually get this money are going to continue to get this money, and we are going to have a lot of the outcomes that you discussed. And there are very large pots of money that are supposed to go directly to benefiting quote unquote disadvantaged communities, or which is what they use in the law, frontline communities that are supposed to go to community-based organizations. And so now is the time to think about what this ground floor opportunity looks like for our communities. And myself, the Energy Justice Law and Policy Center is convening a new group called the Energy Justice Alliance that is fundamentally trying to do this. How can we organize in our community so we can begin to identify where we have that opportunity for that wonderful case study, that you pointed out? Like, send that to me. Like, we want to be developing these plans and identifying them and putting pressure on our representatives to make sure we see these things happen on the ground. It is incredibly challenging, and it is also there's an opportunity to build some institutions to get some of this money invested, and it's challenging. And I think we have every reason to believe that it's going to be a both and. We're going to see a lot of the bad happen, and we're going to try and seize this opportunity. The last thing I'll say is, what I've said in the context of this, and I keep saying, is that we can't lose. Like, organizing around this and building with our communities is a win-win. Like, we can't lose by doing that. So that's where we are.
Thank you. Lee, what about you?
And I'm excited to hear about the EJ Alliance, Raya. It sounds fascinating, and I've been encouraged to hear about more and more formations nationally trying to position to make sure that these resources are flowing to the right places. So that gives me some hope. I mean, on a local scale, one thought. I think similar to like corporate campaigning, for our partners to think about how to leverage federal dollars has been dizzying. It's like overwhelming, right? The scale of the dollars has been like shocking to people. And then where to actually go, all the different pots of money and opportunities, whether it's at the municipal, state, or through competitive grants, has been overload for many of our folks that work oftentimes very local scale, right? And so, as in like any campaign, I think it's been really important to figure out a kind of a clear assessment. And for us, that's meant pulling on some of our allies and partners. For CLU, Community Labor United, we're sort of proud members of the Painters Union, DC 35. And through the national office, there's a person who has helped us kind of understand and navigate this overwhelming landscape when it comes to all these opportunities. So that's been huge. And I think we've also been really fortunate with just the timing of where we were around the community-owned microgrid project. We started visioning around that in 2016, 2017. And so the idea was there, the group was in place, and so we were well positioned for federal dollars that are flowing. So we got the first chunk of money through the city of Boston, about $1 million to go to the community-owned microgrid project in Chinatown. And I think we're well positioned for some of the federal grant dollars as well, through the Infrastructure, Investment and Jobs Act, maybe Inflation Reduction Act. And so we rely heavily on this guy, John Doherty at the Painters Union, who's been great. It's not a policy campaign. And again, it's a different type of thinking. The one other thought I'll just say is, like, I'm excited because in this area, there are folks that are really trying to model good projects. We work a lot with the Greater Boston Labor Council here in our area. They're working with labor and community partners to advance efforts that would improve local infrastructure, maybe electrify it, that are including the investment in apprenticeship programs, that are also in creating pathways to kind of careers in the trades, and that are also investing dollars in like wraparound services for local communities and workers like childcare. So it's happening. I think you said it really well, Raya, but like there's the money and opportunities are there. And I think we just need more good examples of ones that are actually securing sort of that triple bottom line versus just going into the pockets of those big corporate interests.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lee. Jessica, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, so one thing I want to highlight is the Local Clean Energy Alliance is a small organization. We have 3 staff and a bunch of volunteers. And so the reality of the situation is I don't see us actually applying for this money alone, right? It would be done in collaboration. And I do think that that's a challenge because what I've seen, in terms of our experience with regranting, oftentimes it's not a lot of money, right? It's not enough. But we definitely need access to these larger pots of money that are, being promised by the federal and state government, because if we're really going to build microgrids in our community, we need those kinds of resources. If we're serious about electrifying homes and old housing stocks, and for, to reach people who are renters and reach low income people, we're going to need that money to start that transition. And we need to ensure that we build the microgrids to power that electrification. Because one thing we're saying is we don't want to create more electricity demand and then continue to depend on fossil fuels to generate electricity. So we are thinking about like, how are we powering all this new electrification? And so we do need access to this kind of funding to ensure that this is done right. And that these projects are not piecemealed or cheaply done in our communities, because this needs to be done holistically and for the long haul. And so, yeah, and especially just recognizing that money, once we're able to do, these retrofits to our communities, that's a bunch of jobs right there for the people in our communities as well. And so we want to ensure that money reaches those very projects that we're preparing for.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Jessica. And Felicia, I'll let you wrap us up on this question.
Yeah, it's about, community, like the money trail. Like my work is rattling cages, shaking up the questions, like asking the questions, the hard questions that nobody wants to answer, making people uncomfortable. This has been an industry that has dominated and made their own rules for too long, and now it's time to hold people accountable for their actions. They can't just make all this money and go on all these vacations and have all these homes while we have people struggling in our communities where these companies are promising like to hire local people from the state. Okay, well, that's just so the state keeps all the money. But where is that money going? Why isn't it going back into the community that brought the money in the first place? Why isn't this going to the residents of the state that help build all of this green energy and trying to change the future? Like we need to hold them accountable, and we need to bring more mental health into our talks. It goes hand in hand, like we're stronger in numbers, and the more questions we ask and the more we're just in their face and we just don't go away, somebody is going to have to answer. And that's me. I'm the little guy. I'm out here on the front lines and I want to know, and they are going to have a hard time getting rid of me because I am going to be everywhere. And there's more of me everywhere in the United States, everywhere in the world, and we all want the same thing. We all need to be better. All of us, the utility companies, the workers, all the way down the line. You know, like we need to get back to the basics, and we need to be a community again.
Thank you so much, Felicia. I love that because something I was going to say is like with this federal funding coming down, right? Although we are striving for a future where we have energy democracy, where we are directly owning these assets, being on boards, right? A part of it is that we are in charge of the decisions that are being made, right? So we can incorporate those principles right now by creating oversight committees, by setting the standards by which our states and cities disperse this money, right? Talking about workforce standards, talking about which projects we're going to invest in, who gets to create those projects, right? We don't want them in the hands of utilities. I might be a small organization with a staff of 3, but within my coalition, we are powerful together and we can do this work. You know what I'm saying? Like we see it happening with the Boston and Chelsea microgrids. We can do that right here in the East Bay, right? We already have our CCA that we have created that has governance guidelines, right? So it's also about like setting these standards as they are coming down from the federal government to our states and to our cities, and making sure we're directing the funds, even if we ourselves cannot capture them, right? Because to Felicia's point, we're going to be the loudest ones. You can't shut me up. You know what I'm saying? And we are stronger when we work together. So I'm going to take us to our last question, which is about organizing. Because energy democracy means that we transform this energy system by shifting power from private electric corporations to workers and communities. It's this shift in power that's going to enable us to build true wealth building and safe jobs, energy affordability and accessibility. It's how we're going to get to 100% renewable energy, and it's how we're going to get to true democratic governance over the entire energy system, right? So we have a long way to get there, and we need people there with us. So can you talk to us, the audience, about the organizing strategies you're using in your campaigns to shift power to workers and communities, and how can others get involved in the work that you're doing? And I'll start with you, Lee.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Ninabu. I mean, we spend so much time. We're at a kind of a cool phase in our campaigning where we spent so much time building power, organizing, and fighting, and now we're kind of in a fortunate place because there's victories. And instead of just jumping into the next campaign, which I think we tend to do and like to do, we got to think a little bit about implementing and now building on those victories. And it's a challenging phase because sometimes the fight is what really brings us, right? There's so much to be angry and incensed about that we talked about earlier with the role of corporations in sort of this whole energy system. But I think we've been trying to figure out how to take the organizing strategies that we used, which were really more focused on shifting decision makers to implement and create a policy, right? And now it's on us to actually figure out how we work to implement. So that's kind of a phase where we're in right now. And we worked really hard to move this thing called the Building Emissions Disclosure and Reduction Ordinance or something. And it's here in the city of Boston. And in that process, there's so much opportunity for us to create space for local community residents, for labor to be directly a part of the process, to develop the regulations, to ensure strong worker standards and protections, and even to direct where penalties for large building owners that don't comply. This is basically a thing where largest building owners have to take action to reduce their emissions, get to net zero by 2050. And if they don't start taking those actions starting next year, they have to actually invest into a fund, a community fund that is directed and driven by a review board that is comprised of 2/3 community stakeholders. And so, we're fortunate to have a person that's in the city that's leading the efforts, that actually is the chief of energy and open space. She previously represented a faith-based organization in the Green Justice Coalition steering committee. We have strong relationships with our Greater Boston building trades. to not just secure like project labor agreements around greening the schools, but also we actually have to push hard conversations around affordable housing and rent control. And so what's cool about that is I think it's pushing our relationships as community and labor to really be together and to stand unified. But it's also about getting people involved through our partner organizations. They're learning how to organize their communities, how to run strategic campaigns, how to think about funding and governance. And they're also sharing a lot of information about how people can get into amazing careers in the trades with great pay and benefits. So there's a lot of really cool opportunities that are coming out as a result of this. And I think it lends itself to us really growing our numbers and our power.
Hey, thank you so much. Raya.
There really is so much going on, as I mentioned again, about, how can we hold this in the context of New York State? How can we hold the state accountable to all of the good things we've gotten for both public renewables, actually shutting down the power plants? That's the big push here in New York, is that we've got this law that says, and this plan that says we need to actually transition away from fossil fuels and shut down these plants and shut down this infrastructure. And there's all kinds of things in the way of folks actually committing to make that happen. And so we have to push back on that. But from the organizing perspective, we're really focused on really popular and community education, especially for our Black and BIPOC communities, about, what is a just transition? What is the state doing in the first instance? And then the second part is what one of my co-panelists said earlier. It's like, we need to get to that place where we have those plans, those community-led plans. And we need to start seeing those examples of when that happens. Because, I'll have my congressman is Jamal Bowman. He's pretty cool. He'll call me and be like, Raya, like, what are the projects that we need? And I'm like, I hear you, Jamal, but did you read this grant? I need $100,000 and an engineer on staff before I can even apply for that grant. Like, we are nowhere near being able to have that capacity to really put our hands up to engage in these really complex infrastructure processes. So we're focused on popular education. And then, to your point, what are the things that we can install in our local, state, and county governments that will provide some of those controls, that will provide community input in the process, that will mandate that we do things, so that they have community impact and they give communities control and have community participation. So, it's hard. It is hard. It's hard. But this is what we're working to do. It's hard.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Raya. Felicia.
Yeah, it's like, you gotta ask the hard questions. You have to be involved in your community. Okay, like in Ohio, before these sites go up, the energy companies, they come in, they hold meetings at the town halls or at the high schools, and they promise all these things. And you got to hold these people accountable to their words. If they're saying this to the community, it's like, get involved in your community, ask them the hard questions, hold them accountable for what they say they're gonna do. Like we can like Ohio has this House Bill 6 that's completely corrupt, the corrupt bill, like, we can come together as a community and get rid of that completely, because it's not good for the state of Ohio. And if more people knew about it, then they would think the same thing. Like, we have to get out there, and we have to make ourselves known. Like, we're little. So Ohio's a big state, and like, we're gonna get out there and we're gonna push. And like, even at the fairs, politicians love the fairs. That's how you get your vote. So let's go ask them. Let's go be face to face with them. Worker to politician, like, how are you gonna help my life be better and everybody's life around me? Like, we have to come together and really be raw and let them know, what's really going on out there, because we can't sugarcoat everything forever, or nothing's going to change.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And Jessica.
So our work to advocate for a community choice program, was very intersectional with labor, faith-based leaders, social justice organizations. I mean, we reached out to everyone to educate them on why we needed a community choice program. And our program has actually been in operation for the last 5 years. And so we've more recently started to take steps back to really be intentional about reaching people we have not been reaching in the time that we were doing our advocacy. So we're really going out into the community with a lot of like knowledge share around what electrification is, what microgrids are, how this could work in our communities, how this can create more jobs. And so that is a lot of what we've been doing, and particularly reaching out to our youth and educating them, because this is their workforce, this is their generation's work, and we want to prepare them for that.
Thank you so much. And I just want to quickly plug PowerSwitch Actions, Energy Democracy, Popular Education Tools, because we do have resources like that video. We have one-pagers. We have a whole slide deck that's dedicated to talking about energy democracy in a way that is accessible, inviting, easy to understand, and energizing. So I know we're close to time, but I do want to end with just asking the panelists, like, what is bringing you hope about the future with energy democracy? So I know this is a challenge. Like Raya said, it's hard. But I'm sure we're also hopeful, or we wouldn't be in this work. Lee, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I really love, Jessica, that you were just talking about young people. I just see a different, just in the relationships in our work, I've just seen a different level of engagement across all of our partners. And so that's labor, community, which is often adult organizing efforts. And then you got young people who, I mean, there's this young person I'm working with that I met when they were 10 years old. And they are now a young person in their mid-20s that has been doing amazing youth organizing work and is really wanting to go deeper on environmental justice sort of coalition building efforts and deeper with Community Labor United. So I think that is huge for me, to see the next generation of young people that are getting engaged, that are, really excited about figuring out these conversations around apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship work. You can hear my kids in the background there, but I think these opportunities, the pathways around vocational schools, I think there's a lot of work we're doing locally to improve that. So I just see a ton of opportunity and people talking together in a way, and across other issues. I mentioned the housing one earlier. That's a sticky one between some of our community and labor partners, but because of these other spaces that have been created where they're coming together, I'm very hopeful that we can make progress in other areas too that are really needed.
Thank you so much, Lee. Jessica.
Yeah, definitely. The young folks, the youth, are really inspiring, and watching them grow up in such a short span of time it's just really great to witness. Yeah, I've been working with youth, and Spanish speaking women, and going back to 8 years ago when I first started at the local Clean Energy Alliance, my biggest struggle was that clean energy was dominated by white men who spoke a language of English that was none I had ever heard before. All the acronyms, all the, just so much disconnection from reality. And now we have youth, we have folks from different backgrounds and different languages talking about these issues. There was a time where nobody understood what energy democracy meant. Now there's so many people doing the work and the advocacy and really pushing the vision for what we want to see in our communities. So that's really what gives me hope.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I'll pass it to you, Raya.
Yeah, I want to, twinkle and plus all the things that have been said. And I also, we really are at the dawn of a climate movement in terms of people, diverse communities getting engaged, young people. And as an activist, I always have hope about that, about the power of what we can do together.
Thank you. And Felicia.
Yeah, my job gives me hope for the future. Like we're out here and we're trying to build a better future so our children and our children's children, so our generations have a home. And everybody has to work, everybody has to have money, so we have to have this change. And with all this money that's coming out, it's time to swoop some of it up and use it for our benefits. And also, I hate to say this, but these tax breaks give me hope that we might have fair wages one day. They can't get the money without giving a little bit more of it to us and to the community. Yeah, there's hope out there.
Yes. Thank y'all all so much. I do want to, shout y'all out. Thank you so much, Felicia, Lee, Jessica, and Raya, for sharing your experiences with us. The work that y'all doing is incredible. It is helping us build brick by brick the future that we want for our future generations and for us on this planet. I also want to shout out Little Things, who helped us develop these energy democracy tools, and the Climate Museum for hosting this panel discussion with us. We're going to close out, and for the audience, you will see our contact information on the next slide. But yes, thank you again so much. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Take care.